This is a unit for a bit here on teaching and the teacher as a person and the teacher in relationship to students, where personhood and relationship are the key categories. There's a whole bunch of theological stuff behind why those things are important that if you've been tracking with me, you'll track, and you can probably fill in a few of the details. I won't go there right at the moment, but I think you can play along with me in this audience. And so there is a whole bunch of stuff that I think is important about the person that is the teacher. So look at my page 55 here, major themes. You teach who you are. Rick Watts, dearly beloved, longtime New Testament professor at Regent, and a few of you who are Regent alumni know him. He's coming to teach next summer, this time, right, for BGST, 2 courses in New Testament or Biblical Studies. A wonderful person, and a person who loves the Scriptures, loves the Lord, loves teaching. He's a great, great person. He went back to teach in a college in Australia, his home and native land. Leaving the frozen north of Canada for the warm beaches of Australia. After his, missionary journey, his long missionary journey to the frozen north of Canada. So Rick will be with you next year, so putting in a plug for Rick. In his last sermon that he gave at Regent, this is something he said. He was reflecting a little bit upon, in a sense, the call of the gospel to change our lives. And he said, this is really challenging if you're a teacher, because we all know really that what you do when you're a teacher is you teach who you are. And it's really, my comment would be, he didn't make this point. I would then go on to say, and that's actually a really scary thing. That should scare the daylights out of you. What he means, of course, is what? He means you can't help but conveying who you are, what you care about, how you understand things, what your own state of heart and mind and attitude and spirit is in the process of teaching. What you communicate is yourself. Right? And it's interesting, as I think back to my educational journey, which took many, many years, as people on the academic path do, I remember far more about the people who taught me and what they were like as people and what they cared about as people and how they related to me as people than I do about the content of everything they said, which I have not remembered every last detail of. Just saying, maybe. And you can probably think back to influential people in your life or teachers in your life and who they were, how they related to people, what they cared about, how they demonstrated that care. That made an impression on you, right? Now, you probably also learned some content, some skills, stuff. You learned stuff from them. But you also learned from their example. You learned from, if I could say it this way, small I, incarnational nature of the teacher. Right? So you're always going to exemplify something. Leadership is also, teaching is always a form of leadership. Right? Leadership is primarily about setting an example. Right? Usually what you're going to pick up from is lots of different things at the level of values and relationship and caring and perspective beyond the content per se, right? So it's just going to matter who you are in the state of your own heart and life, as well as the content of your own head, and what you do with the stuff that you're actually learning. How do you enact and practice what it is that you're teaching? That's a big part of who you are. This is a part of every subject, and it's true whether it is at the level of teaching a 10-year-old to play the piano, or teaching your daughter to bake cupcakes, or teaching someone how to be a disciple or how to pray, right? There's an overall modeling, which is how do you understand this, how do you care about this, and how do you do this, right? It's the shocking thing about being in any kind of Christian ministry, because people actually look at you to set something of an example of how do you understand this, how do you care about this, and how do you do this, how do you live this. Not that anybody is expected to be perfect, because hopefully we're not expecting everybody to be perfect. I don't expect any of my teachers to be perfect or my pastors to be perfect. But what we do expect and look for is a certain kind of modeling, which is how do they understand this? How do they care about it? How do they do it? So if you have somebody who is very good at, talking, in a sense, the talk, but not walking the walk, you think something is amiss. Right? So if you say you're an expert on cakes and you actually can't make a decent cake, you're not actually an expert on cakes. Right? So you teach who you are. It's unavoidable, and it's really shocking and scary, actually. So even if you're teaching the piano to 10-year-olds, attend to your own heart is my message. Attend to your own attitudes. Attend to your own values. Right? Because what is transmitted is not just the content, it's the relationship. It's the concern, it's the value, it's the vision, it's the compassion, it's the care, it's the whatever. Right? So all of these are shaping relationships. So every teacher-learner relationship, whether that's about the piano or whether that's about prayer or whether that's about graduate school, is always a shaping and forming relationship. One of the things to be aware of, as I alluded to earlier, just to bring it back a little bit, is that there's always a power dynamic at work. Right? So you, as the teacher who has expertise about the cake, and if you have people who want to learn how to make the cake, you have a certain amount of power over them because you have what they want and need. How are you playing with that? Right? How are you dealing with that? How are you exercising that power? Right? Core biblical concern from the very beginning is how do you, to the very end really, how do you manage, how do you handle, how do you deal with the power that you have? Right? Is that power over to dominate or to exploit? Is that power that is used in the interest of and toward the advancement of and for the welfare of someone else? Right? Core part of the biblical story. Just think about all the examples of that throughout all of Scripture. It's just a huge moral point. It's a point about teaching. Right? It's a point about how do you use what you know. Knowledge is a form of power. Skills are a form of power. The platform to be the person that shapes an experience for other people is a form of power. How are you using it? We're sinful, fallen human beings. We can all use that power, position, and authority for other ends other than the good and welfare of the learner. Right? We can use it to show off. We can use it to make a lot of money. We can use it to impress people. We can use it to make ourselves feel good. We can abuse that need on the other end in all kinds of ways that relationships can be abusive. Right? So attend to your own heart, because there is a modeling function and there is a power dynamic inevitably at work. Totally inevitably. Right? The more aware we are of those things, self-aware, the better. And the more we attend to our own heart, soul, and innards, the better in this process. Okay, so you do teach who you are. Point two, teaching is a deeply personal practice. It involves the whole person. You might not think it does, but it does. Right? So if you're supposed to be the pastor, or you are the pastor, and you're preaching sermons and the congregation knows that your life is completely out of whack with what you're preaching, right? Your teaching doesn't matter. It might still be wonderful in preaching terms. It still might be really good, biblically. But to that group of people in that setting, it doesn't matter anymore, right? Because we all know the disconnect, and we sniff it out, and we say, aha, that's a problem. And when you say, aha, that's a problem, no more learning is going to go on. I can guarantee you. It just isn't. So, it's very daunting. God is our helper. Relationship between teacher-learner is the key. So, students can learn, I think, almost anything. Almost anything. If the relationship between teacher and learner creates the space together where they can actually go somewhere. Right? The key really is the teacher-learner relationship. Right? It's not so much the student-content relationship as it's the student-teacher relationship that opens up the learning. It opens up the pathway to the content, the knowledge, the skills, whatever it is. Right? So it is a relational business through and through. So the more you think about teacher-learner relationship, the better off you'll be. Right? I say that partially also just to think ahead in terms of some of our coming discussion about methods. We often tend to get very locked into one particular method, that's true, or we put a lot of eggs in the basket of preparing ourselves content-wise to fit a certain method that we want to present, per se. But the problem is if you get very caught up into that dynamic, you're not thinking enough about the relationship that you actually have with people and cultivating that relationship with people. So the principle at work here that I'll come to also a bit later is the higher you want to set the bar for people's learning and transformation and growth in this sort of area, and if you think about it in church terms, you're really, I think you really want to raise the bar quite high. You want to say, take very seriously being a heart, mind, soul, and strength disciple of Jesus in every area of life, without any, bifurcation or splitting off or disintegration of your life from Sunday to Monday, right? So if you're going to raise the bar really super high like that, what's involved? Well, a lot of things are going to be really involved. The relationship you have with people is going to be key to that raising of that bar. Building relationship, building trust, doing teaching in the context of relational growth, right? Because it's a relational business that we're talking about. So that relationship, attend to that relationship, think into that relationship just as much as you think into the content, per se, of what's on your notes that you're bringing into the room, right? The last one here, self-reflection is essential for all these reasons I'm talking about. If this is a deeply personal business, you're watched as much as anything else. You're exemplifying and modeling as much as anything else in teaching. Even if it's something fairly, in a sense, straightforward and almost mechanical in nature, you're modeling something as a means of teaching, whether you want to or not, you are, right? Attend to your own inner life, right? And in Christian terms, seek the grace and mercy and help of God in repentance and humility, be honest about where you are, and ask the Spirit to give you guidance and make it adequate that you possibly have some positive impact on somebody else, despite all of your flaws, failings, weaknesses, sins, and everything else. Yeah. Does that make sense? I mean that absolutely seriously, right? Who is adequate for these things? We're really not. And if you take seriously this whole person transformation stuff, you're really messing with people's lives if you're trying to teach them, right? You're really messing with people's lives. You're getting inside of them. You're challenging the way they live. You're looking for a change in the way they live their life. Who are you to do that, right? Man, you're really messing. You can really mess people up, right? That's the other thing. Teaching is a daunting responsibility because you can really mess people up. Okay? Teachers will be judged more severely, says James, too.